So a lot of great IEMs came out in 2024, and today we're going to go through them. We're going to rank them in a tournament battle royale style based off of my personal subjective opinion, and it's going to be fun. Starting on the left side, we have the Elysian Pilgrim versus the Lecture Cadenza 4. Now, both of these follow a clean, balanced sound signature. The only real difference is that the Pilgrim focuses more on like the staging, it's more laid back. The mid bass is slightly better, whereas the Cadenza 4 is going to be a little bit airier, it's going to be a little bit more forward when it comes to the vocals. I like the Cadenza 4 a little bit more because it is cheaper and it has a more special flavor to it when it comes to treble, and it's still pretty technical, not as technical as the Pilgrim. But overall, I do enjoy the Cadenza 4 better for the airy presentation. Then next, we have the Zigot Odysseys versus the Kiwi Years KE4. And in my opinion, these two are not very close. I think the Odysseys are just like a tier above the KE4s. They are pretty much a mini Subatomic Storm. If you look at the graph, it graphs very similar. It's a bit warmer than the Storm. Not as technical when it comes to like the separation and detail, but it does scale better than the Storm. It's also more technical than the KE4s, and the plating also is a lot more beautiful. So because of those reasons, I'm going to go with the Odyssey. Then moving on, we have the Pilgrim Noir versus the Full Explorer. Now, price-wise, these two are very different. The Noir is a lot more expensive. It's not really worth it unless you get it on sale, like a heavy discount. The Explorer is the much better value, but if we're talking about sound alone, basically these two sound pretty much the same. They go for the same scaling, laid back sound. Noir is just a little bit more detailed, it's a little bit cleaner, it's overall just an upgrade to the Explorer and just a better version of the Explorer. So because of that, I'm gonna have to unfortunately give it to the Noir. Then moving on, we have the HBB Punch versus the HBB Deuce, and in my opinion, the Punch is just a straight up better version of the Deuce. Both of them are bass heads, but the Punch is just more balanced. You get better vocals, better treble extension, more detail, better separation, but you also get the impact, the slam, and the quality low end you expect from a bass headset. So yeah, I would go with the Punch. Now moving on from the Punch, we have the Oracle Mark IIIs versus the Full Cantor. Now, you guys know how I feel about the Cantor. It literally gave me a headache. Maybe just my HRTF, but I just can't listen to the headphone. Like, it's just too shrill. It's a little bit too bright. It's too lean. It doesn't sound enjoyable as an IEM overall for me personally. It is very technical, but the Oracle Mark III just has better bass. It's not shrill. It doesn't give me a headache. Overall, it's just the better all-rounder set for me personally. So because of that, I'm gonna go with the Oracle Mark IIIs. Then after the Mark IIIs, we have the Hype 10s versus the Origins. Now these are actually fairly similar but a little bit different at the same time. They're both, I guess, endgame in terms of what they're doing. The Hype 10s is a endgame all-rounder set, whereas the Origin is fairly similar. It's not as detailed as the Hype 10s, but the bass is better. It's more bouncy, it's more textured. And I think I'm gonna go with the Origins because if you have $1,000, I'll just get the Monarch Mark IIIs or the LTDs and kind of just skip the Hype 10s. Whereas the Origin is kind of a side grade to the Mark IIIs, to the LTDs. It's more like low and heavy, and it just has like a bouncier and more texture, more vibrational low end. So because of that, I'm gonna go with the Origin because it is more unique. Then after the Origin, we have the Isle Volaire versus the Dunu Brain Damage. Now, you guys know how I feel about the Brain Damage. I think it's too sizzly, it's a bit lean. It's a little bit like overly bright. It has that weird timbre, artificial timbre to it. Whereas the Isle Volaire is the complete opposite. It's smooth, it's natural in the treble. It has actual ESTs for around the same price. The bass, both are like relatively the same. Mids are relatively the same. But the main difference is that the Volaire is just more natural, it's smoother, it's less artificial sounding. And because of that, I'm going to take the Volaire over the Brain Damage any day of the week. Then lastly, we have the Tangzu Bajie versus the High Senior Mega 5 EST 7th edition. And I think this Mega 5 is kind of overhyped. It's a neutral, very smooth, very neutral, boring, set, right? Personally, I like something more dynamic. The bass on the Bajie is just much better. The impact, the texture, the rumble is just a lot more authoritative, and then the rest, the treble, it's not as smooth as the High Senior, but like overall I find the Bajie more enjoyable for me personally because I just don't like that neutral kind of like vanilla sound. But if you do that like that, boring vanilla sound, you can go for the Mega 5. Personally, I'm gonna go with the Bajie. Moving on to the right side, we have the Audio Hype 4s versus the Moondrop Clinical Dusk. Now these two are fairly different. The Dusk is kind of like a neutral balanced set with like sizzly like treble emphasis, whereas the Hype 4 is smoother, it has better bass texture, it's more dynamic and more spacious to me personally overall. To me, the Hype 4 is the better all-rounder set. It has better bass texture, it's smoother and more natural when it comes to the treble, and overall when it comes to mid-range, they're relatively the same, but it's more dynamic and more fun, more engaging on the Hype 4s. Whereas the Dusk, if you like a balanced and clean sound and you don't mind like a slight sizzliness, planar timbre when it comes to treble, then yeah, the Dusk is fine. but personally I just find the high force to be more unique, so I'm gonna go with the high force. Then after the high force, we have the SimGot EM10s versus the SimGot Super Mix 4. Basically, value wise, the Super Mix 4 is much better than the EM10s, but the EM10s is still very good value if you can find it for $350. It is basically just a better version of the Super Mix 4. Both of them are very like Harman inspired, very similar when it comes to the overall sound. The EM10 it just has more detail, it's a bit smoother overall, and since we're going based off of sound alone, I'm gonna go with the EM10s, even though the Super Mix 4 is the better value. Then moving on, we have the Myers CKLVX D62 versus the D41s. And basically the D41s, when it first came out, it was the same as the Pula. They have like a more laid back, dreamy like sound. It's more unique. It's less all-rounded as the D62s. And the D62s is just the objectively the better set when it comes to technicalities, so I'm gonna go with the D62s. But next we have the Dunu DaVincis. I completely forgot about this set versus the Manger T Pros, and this is very easy. The T Pros is just straight up a better version of the DaVincis. They basically copied the DaVincis and made it like a better version with more detail and like better timbre. So just go with the T Pros. It's literally just a better version of the DaVincis. Then after that, we have the SimGot ET142 versus the 7Hz Timeless 2. And this is pretty tough because they're both very similar. They're all like all-rounder sets. You have a lot of variety with the tuning nozzles. Personally, for me, I will take the ET142 because the fit is just better for me. The Timeless 2, it has like this weird like round circle thing, so it doesn't fit me the best. And the ET142 also gives you a more drastic change when it comes to tuning. You go from something brighter, very detailed, to a balanced set to like a warmer leaning set, whereas the Timeless 2 is kind of like sits around the all-rounder to warm sound. So because of that, because of the fit and the extra variety on the ET142, as well as just like the overall design, I'm gonna go with the ET142. But if you choose the 7Hz Timeless 2, I get it, they're very similar. Then moving on, we have the ZGOT Arcadias versus the ZGOT Deschinkos. The main difference is that the Deschinkos is a mid-volume bassy set, whereas the Arcadias is a high-volume bassy set. So depending on your volume preference, either one of them are pretty good. I do listen louder when it comes to like just my listening preferences, so because of the better scaling, immersion, and the better faceplate design, I'm gonna go with the Arcadias. Then moving on, we have the Tangent Origin versus the Moondrop Condense. Basically, nobody should be buying the Condense at retail, maybe at around $100, you know, if you want the better packaging, but you could just get the Tangzu Xuanyu, right? At $200 after tax, the Condense is very overpriced. I would 100% go for the Origin over the Condense. It has better triple extensions, a little bit more area, you get a little bit more detail overall. It's just the better set for around the same price. So yeah, I would get the Origin. And then lastly, we have the ZGOT Cinco Tres versus the Earphone P5+2. I still think the 5+2 is a bit overhyped. It's a fine IEM. There's nothing really wrong with it. It doesn't, you know, do anything unique. It doesn't scale very well because of the extra treble boost. It has a little bit of that planar sizzliness when it comes to the timbre, and the bass texture is, you know, it's okay. It's not the best. It's not the worst. It does its job. Whereas the Cinco Tres, it has like much better bass texture as well as, you know, better timbre. It doesn't have that sizzly treble timbre. So because of the better low end as well as the better timbre and like more natural treble, I would go with the Cinco Tres. I just think it's the better all-rounder set if you're choosing between those two over there. Now moving up to the next bracket, we have the Condensa 4 versus the Odysseys, and I'm gonna pick the Odysseys. It's one of my favorite sets. It's probably my favorite set of 2024. It's just super immersive, super unique. Again, basically a mini Storm that scales better and a bit fuller in the overall sound. It's kind of no-brainer for me, especially when I listen to higher volumes. It's just more immersive and more special, and for those reasons, I'm gonna go with the Odysseys. Now, as for the Pilgrim Noir versus the Punch, these two are pretty different. The Noir is a more chilled set, it's more laid back, it scales better than the Punch, whereas the Punch is like a very bass head like heavy set. It does the balanced bass head sound very good. So these two are a bit of a toss-up because depending on the mood, either one could like replace the other. I'm gonna go with the Punch. It's just a very good bass head set, pretty much endgame bass head IEM at like around $400 on sale. Now as for the Oracle Mark IIIs versus the Origins, both are pretty different. The Origin is like a bassier set. The Mark IIIs is more like laid back all-rounder, you know, a clean balanced sound signature. I just think the Origin is more unique because it does have that like bouncy vibrational texture when it comes to the sub bass. It's just a very fun bassy but still balanced IEM, whereas the Oracle Mark IIIs, it's kind of your like typical neutral, you know, slightly bass boosted, slightly like boosted in the treble kind of IEM. So because of that, I'm gonna go with the Origin, but the Mark IIIs are still pretty good. Then lastly, we have the Aero Volaire versus the Tangzu Bajie, and the main difference is that the Volaire is just a smoother version of the Bajie. It's not gonna be as like impactful in the bass, but overall in terms of the separation, the detail, the treble extension, and just like how smooth it is, the Volair is just like a tier above the Bajie in my opinion, and I would take the Volair over the Bajie. Now moving on to the right side, we have the Hype 4s versus the EM10s, and basically the EM10 is just a all-rounder set. The Hype 4s is more bass heavy. I like the low end on the Hype 4s much better. It's more impactful, it's much more like texture when it comes to the bass. The EM10s is a little bit more detailed overall, but I think I would still take the Hype 4s because it's just more engaging, it's more unique and less harmonish. Then after that, we have the D62s versus the T Pros, and surprisingly, I would actually take the D62s because I just find them more engaging. I find them a lot more dynamic, more exciting with the Senkai wide tips. The T Pros is going to be fullers, it's more meatier, it's thicker when it comes to the low end. They're around the same when it comes to technicalities, but the D62 is just like the better overall like all-rounder. It's a little bit more dynamic, and it costs $100 less. So because of those reasons, I'm gonna go with the D62s. Then after that, we have the ET142 versus the Arcadias. Now these two are pretty different. The Arcadias, again, scaling set, very bassy, very different from the ET142, which can go from like a bright leaning sound to an all-rounder to like a warmer and more laid-back presentation. I think for like the value, I think the ET142 is better. In terms of overall enjoyment, because the ET142 does have more variety, it has better technicalities as well for around the same price, I'm gonna give it over to the ET142s, but I can understand why you would like the Arcadias more. Then lastly, we have the Origin versus the Synchro Tress. I still think the Synchro Tress is the better all-rounder set. It has better low-end texture, it's more energetic, it's more fun overall, while still being pretty well balanced. It still gives you that like similar treble extension. It's not gonna be as smooth as the Origin, but overall, like in terms of enjoyability, I like the Synchro Tress more. Now moving up to the quarterfinals, on the left side we have the Odysseys versus the Punch. These two are very different. The Punch is again a bass head set. The Odyssey is a clean, balanced set that scales very good. And you guys know how I am. I love my high volume immersive sets, and I'm gonna go with the Odysseys. Again, it's a mini storm for around $200. You can't really beat that. Then moving down, we have the Origins versus the Volair. Both of these are also pretty different. The Origin is a bassy set. It focuses more on the low end texture, whereas the Volair focuses more on the treble. It's smoother, it's more detailed, it's more balanced. Now, depending on my mood, if I'm feeling more hip hop, more R&B, more rap, I would go for the Origin. And if I'm feeling more like classical, instrumental, bands, indie, stuff like that, I would go for the Volair. The only real differentiator is that the Volair is just so smooth. It's very detailed. The timbre is so natural, so smooth for the price that I kind of have to give it to the Volair, even though the bass texture is much better on the Origin. But overall, I would say if you were looking for an all-rounder, the Volair would be the better pick. Now moving on to the right side of the quarterfinals, we have the Hype 4s versus the D62s. Now these two are actually a bit closer than I would expect it. The Hype 4s is going to be better in the low end, whereas the D62 is more dynamic, it's more engaging, and overall in terms of technicalities, both of them are pretty close. I really don't know. It would probably come down to a coin toss, but I will say the treble and the overall timbre on the Hype 4 is much smoother than the D62s. They're using Sonians. The D62s have their own custom drivers, pretty good custom drivers, but it doesn't match the Sonians. So you know what, I'm gonna give it the Hype 4s because the bass plus the better timbre and just like smoother sound combined does edge it out a bit more than the D62s. And then moving down, we have the ET142 versus the Synchro Tress, and these two are pretty different. The Synchro Tress doesn't have the plain on timbre, it's better when it comes to low end impact, low end texture is better on the Synchro Tress. Both have the ability to be a all-rounder sound. Well, I mean like the Synchro Tress is an all-rounder sound, but overall I would probably give it to the Synchro Tress. Again, the timbre and the bass is just combined, it's going to be slightly better than the ET142, even though the ET142 can potentially be more technical if you use the brighter, tuning nozzle, but that also affects the timbre. So yeah. Alright, moving up to the semifinals, we have the Odysseys versus the Volair, and I'm just gonna go with the Odysseys again for the same reason. It's a mini storm, it has better scaling, it's more immersive, the tuning is more unique than the Volair, even though the Volair is the objectively better set when it comes to technicalities. It's gonna be smoother when it comes to the overall playback. At mid volume, I would take the Volair over the Odysseys, but because I listen at a higher volume, I'm gonna go with the Odysseys. It just envelops you into the music, it takes you on a journey, it lets you forget about reality for a second, and you're kind of just vibing. in the sauce. Now moving to the right side, the semifinals, we have the Hype Force versus the Synchro Tres, and this is very simple. The Hype Force is just a better version of the Synchro Tres. It has better bass texture, it's a little bit more rumbier, it's more impactful, but at the same time you get a smoother treble response. It's a little bit more detailed overall, and it's just like a slightly better version of the Synchro Tres. So because of that, I'm gonna go with the Hype Force. And then finally, in the finals, we have the Odysseys versus the Hype Force. Now, because of the way that it was formatted, aka I just randomly typed it in, it's a little bit imbalanced on the left side. So I'm gonna replace the Hype Force in the finals with the Origin, because the Origin probably would have made it to the finals if it was on the right side. And even then, I would still take the Odysseys over the Origin. Again, for the same reasons, the Origin is a very good bass-centric set. The bass texture, the vibrations, like the overall bounciness is probably like top tier, one of the best you can get under $1,000. But the Odysseys are just like so magical, so musical, takes you on a journey. There's really nothing like it once you scale them up. Once again, if you look at the graph, it is literally a mini subtonic storm. Now, another potential finalist could be the Volaire as well, if you just put the Volaire on the right side. But same thing would happen. I would still take the Odysseys over the Volaire, the Origin, or the Hype Force. So either way, the Odyssey for me is my top pick for 2024. It's my favorite IEM that came out last year. I think that if you have the chance, if you're open to listening at higher volumes, you should really give these a shot. It's one of the few sets that actually stands out aside from the Estrella. I would actually like buy this and like, you know, keep it and not just like resell it, because I do think it is a pretty unique set. But aside from that, I hope you guys found this to be fun. My throat is absolutely gone. The METEORs are finally shipped. They're coming in soon. Stay tuned for that. I'm going to be comparing the METEORs to the Brain Damage and some other planars as well. So yeah, it's going to be fun.
Shout out to Rarix Cat, Dom Q, Discal Scotus, B Urak, Mystic Spoon Attack, Walker Standard, User, Patrick, Polly J, Mr. Gorillas, Anton Risto, Gis Sang Young, Ed Dunlap, Christopher Jackson, Name, Henry Claudia, Son of a Horse, 777ZK, Ben Thompson, Obi, Triple Well Extended, Wizard, Frickalicious, Andrick, Ricardo, Tapas R, Chucko Norris, Oh Really, Contain Guava Juice Gains, Shren Buck Lee, Nico, Igris, and Forever New. Thank you guys so much for the year.